Time for Focus. Today we have a report on two Russian media outlets, RT and Sputnik. This amid concerns that Moscow might try to influence the outcome of France's upcoming presidential election after reportedly interfering in the American one. Jonathan Walsh and Elena Volochine report with Josh Vardy.
Not be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin.
I can't stress enough how strongly I am against any state intervention in a sovereign nation's affairs. What Russia did is wrong.
Journalists at Russia Today line up to criticize the actions of Russian President Vladimir Putin, creating problems for his attempts to take control of international news narratives. The Ukrainian conflict started in 2014 and Moscow denied any official intervention. The state television channel stood behind the Russian government and, when accused of broadcasting propaganda, went on the counterattack.
Look at who is doing the labeling. It is the same people, the same establishment politicians or news outlets that used to control the narratives, used to control the story.
Russia Today was created in 2005 by Vladimir Putin with the objective of challenging the Western media's news agenda.
Yes, we're carrying the Russian point of view, but it also often happens to be the kind of alternative, different point of view that you might not necessarily have reflected adequately or explained properly in the mainstream media.
The TV station was first broadcast in English, then in Arabic and Spanish. With its name shortened to RT, it put new focus on the internet and social media to conquer new territories. In France, the site launched in 2015 and its videos have generated millions of page visits, especially on issues like protests against homosexual marriage.
Thank you very much.
Other stories that have generated interest include this one, which claims that the mainstream media is lying about the battle for Aleppo.
How can you quantify that?
How can they maintain that the Syrian government is attacking civilians in Aleppo when every person that's coming out of these areas occupied by terrorists is saying the opposite?
Although introduced as an independent journalist, this woman was in fact an activist invited to the UN by the Syrian regime.
These civilians who are talking about.
There is a true desire to impose the official Russian narrative on a whole series of events by using the fact that a lot of people here, for many different reasons, over the past 15 years, have lost confidence in public discourse. They don't trust the media or politicians.
The objective of Russian media is not to disseminate content based on truth and objectivity. The idea is to truly influence by a narrative, by a very precise, pre-constructed narrative.
Officials say the White House is behind the terrorism of their population and new evidence...
Conspiracy theories are often given airtime on the channel, like this long interview broadcast by the German Russia Today site. A so-called journalist accuses the French government of organizing terrorist attacks on its own country.
Even though the government may deserve it, we don't want the people to just let off steam. So we distract them with this sort of attack. The Paris attack on Charlie Hebdo is clearly a manipulated terrorist attack.
In 2014, the Kremlin launched Sputnik. The channel rose out of the ashes of the state agency RIA Novosti and has since blossomed in several countries and languages on the internet and television networks. In Paris, its journalists claim to work in total independence.
Since the end of the Cold War, the Russian point of view has been ignored. It's as if it didn't exist. We indeed have an alternative vision of information, but it's absolutely free from all Kremlin directives or from anywhere else.
RT and Sputnik have the same editor in Moscow. In France, their editorial lines are very similar and generally express right-wing views. Alarmist comments on immigration are common, while the National Front is often praised and extreme right websites often share their articles. However, Sputnik France refuses to place themselves on a political scale.
It goes from the far left to the far right. Yes, there are people with far left beliefs and there are people with far right beliefs, both working in this newsroom.
The European Union sees this rise of Russian media as something to be wary of. The European Parliament has even voted a resolution against what they term as propaganda. Opinions are divided in France, even among those in the same political party.
I think there's nothing frightening. There is, however, a lack of maturity. These are young media stations that haven't been in France for a long time. Russia today has only been around for a few years. Sputnik is even younger. Therefore, like all media, when they start out, there are perhaps mistakes, articles that are maybe a bit excessive.
There is no exaggeration, there is underestimation of the phenomenon. It's a massive phenomenon of disinformation identical to that which occurred during the Cold War. But it's the same process, the same objective to destabilize the Western world.
One thing is sure, France is on RT's radars. The channel is due to launch a French-speaking version at the end of the year and open a new bureau in Paris. The initial budget is around 15 million euros. The channel's heads in Moscow claim not to support any political party.
To discuss this further, I'm now joined by François-Bernard Huyghe, a communication and information expert. Hello, thank you very much for your time. Now, these concerns that Russia might be trying to influence the outcome of France's presidential election, just how founded are they, do you think?
Well, I would say that what Russia Today and Radio Sputnik practice is known as public diplomacy. It has been invented by the United States in the 60s, and it consists in creating media which are in favor, in multilingual media, which are in favor of, let's say, your ideology or your view of the world. We could say the same about the international Chinese TV. We could say the same about Al Jazeera, which is multilingual and which is probably in favor of the Emirate of Qatar. Not too much criticism about it anyway. And I'm presently speaking on France 24, which is paid by the French state and which considered from Moscow is probably propaganda.
There's a big difference between being financed by the state and actually carrying out propaganda. And there aren't any accusations of France 24, for example, trying to influence a presidential campaign. I mean, what do you make of the specific case of RT and Sputnik?
Yes, there's no doubt that Radio Sputnik has an, let's say, anti-European, anti-American, anti-Occidental point of view. Do they favor a candidate in precisely? If my memory serves me right, I've seen on European TV or radios some statements who are strongly against Mr. Trump, or who were in favor of Obama or Hillary Clinton. So ideology is a very common thing, and trying to influence other countries' vision is very common. In fact, the first who started to do it was Radio Vatican before World War II, spreading the Catholic view by a multilingual radio. So it's very common.
OK, so there might be papers, let's say, that are outwardly left-leaning and others on the right. But in the report, we heard there that RT or Sputnik, for example, they don't really claim to be on either side. And yet RT, wouldn't you say that Russia actually favours Marine Le Pen winning the election here in France?
Well, maybe they're in favor of Marine Le Pen, but after all, it's their right. I mean, if you watch French TV, you will see very few support for Donald Trump, for instance, or for Vladimir Putin. So every media has its ideological point of view, and it tries to spread it. And I'm not very much in favor of a mystery of truth like in Orwell's 1984, which would tell me which media tells the truth, which media is lying. It's my role as a citizen to decide it by myself.
You seem to be suggesting that you can put a lot of different groups of media outlets in the same bag, and yet, as we heard in the report, we've had the European Parliament vote on a resolution aimed at countering what it calls propaganda from Russia. So this seems to be really in a category of its own, this kind of communication that Russia's putting out there internationally.
Well, we see a good example of what the Americans call post-truth era. It's the fact that alternative versions of events like terrorist attacks, for instance, are available on international media and also on the internet and social networks. I don't think that censorship or establishing a system which will tell which media tells the truth or not, like Le Monde did in France, creating des codecs, a kind of software. I think it's probably a counterproductive attitude, because it will increase the feeling that there is a ruling ideology, and that the liberals or the pro-Occidental are exerting a sort of mental control on manufacturing consent. So I think it's giving arguments to the other side than to try to exert any kind of censorship.
Okay, François Bernard-Huyghe, we appreciate your time and your analysis. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.